This is Otterton Mill in Devon, and in here is one of the earliest industrial processes. This water turns this wheel, which turns this thing here, which turns a big millstone in there, to turn this into one of these. Everybody needed bread, so there used to be thousands of mills all over the country. This is Dotton. It's a couple of miles from Otterton. There used to be a mill here, but it was knocked down in the 1960s. The first record of a mill on this site, though, is in Domesday in 1086. We've never dug a mill before, so this site gives us a unique opportunity to look into part of what would have been everyday life for tens of thousands of people. We've got 900 years of history and just 3 days to untangle it. What is it that you find so exciting about mills?
I think they're really interesting structures and we don't know much about them. After all, there must have been many thousands of them in medieval England. And almost every community would have had one because it made grinding the corn, preparing the bread and everything that much easier. And yet we've done very, very little work on them.
Why not, if they're that exciting?
I think it's because of the way archaeologists work. You know, they're either working with sites that are going to be redeveloped, and they don't often seem to involve mills, or they're too small, really, to be part of big research projects that might get the money which archaeologists then spend 3 or 4 years digging. This is pretty well the first process where you harness a different sort of energy, i.e. water power, to alleviate all that work. So it's an industrial revolution in one sense.
This was the last mill building in Dotton. It was knocked down in the 1960s. We're looking for a date for when this building was put up and any sign of anything that may have come before it. There was a mill listed as being in Dotton in Domesday in 1086. But the big question is, has the mill always been in the same place? There are 3 main areas that hopefully will provide some answers in the form of dates. The water wheel would have sat in a deep pit. We'll look at how that was built. Inside was a gear pit to hold the gearing. We'll also try to find that. And there would have been a domestic area, the part the miller would have lived in. Hopefully we'll come across bits of pottery and household stuff that'll also help us with the dating. The mill sits here, on a road crossing the River Otter in South Devon.
Right, photo, bank. Bank's over there, bank's there.
But first, Phil has got to work out where to dig.
Shall we help you a bit?
No. Look, presumably we're on a wheel pit, don't we?
Yeah, wheel pit there, but this photograph was taken from that field over there, looking this
that way.
Yeah.
Ah!
And where we're standing at the moment is just here. This is the mill. The mill was in this area here, coming down here, and at the bottom of it is the wheel somewhere in this position at the end of this leak that comes down here.
That's what we want, isn't it, Martin?
Yeah, the wheel pit. I think the wheel pit would be the best feature to go for straight away because it'll be a big feature under the ground and will delineate the sort of at the end of the building.
Well, I mean, it's on the
That's
map.
where we should start doing the radar.
Start the radar here, yeah.
Look,
and
we
spread out through here.
don't need it.
No, you do. You may have good map evidence. We all know what Stuart's maps are like. But no, more importantly, Phil, it's the first time we've done a mill. We've not done geophysics or radar over a mill. It's important that we collect that data as a future reference.
John, we're not here for your groundbreaking geophysics. We're here to do a site.
It's the way it should be done professionally.
Look, we know where it is.
It will take us 5 minutes to do it.
I've heard that before.
Over here, Stuart.
Yeah, start here, Jimmy.
True to his word, within minutes John's got something for Phil to look at.
That's where we reckon the wheel pit is. Then you see all these reflections going down. Those are actually within the mill building. And this is still inside the building, but suggesting we've got internal divisions.
Happy now, Phil makes a start.
Nice bricks. That's in situ, isn't it, Phil?
That is in situ.
That's in
Oh,
situ.
that's good. Look at that.
Yeah.
Nice load of bricks, yeah. Going straight down there, look.
Right.
So that's one side there.
This is Dotton. Here's the River Otter. This is the road that crosses the river. And the mill, where Phil is here. Just here, water's diverted from the river to the mill along a channel called a leat. The leat enabled the miller to control the flow of water to the mill. In the field across the road from the mill site, we can see remnants of where the leat might be along the base of the slope. How big was it? How powerful? And can we find a date for when it was dug? Helen opens a trench across it. The mill building is really two buildings in one. There's the industrial part of it, where the machinery would have been, and then there's the domestic side, where the miller lived. Using radar, John and his team have been trying to locate that end of the building. They think they've found it. So we open a trench just across here. Naomi's hoping to find more personal stuff here, pottery and domestic material, which will give us some dates. In Phil's trench, we're coming across lots of bricks. And there's also a lot of metalwork that Phil doesn't recognise.
Martin, we got another of these pieces. What are
that's
they?
good, Phil. That's some reinforcing, I think, from the water wheel, where one of the arms, one of the spokes, joined the rim of the wheel, and it was all bolted together. We've got some very good bits of the water wheel, perhaps more than you would expect to survive. We got a lot of the ironwork that held it together, and we could get the size of some of the components from these as well.
The pieces in Phil's trench give us an indication of the size of the wheel. They fit together like this. It's a big wheel, about 3 metres across, probably dating from the Victorian period. Earlier on today, Helen put in a little trench over here to see if she could find the leat, which is the stream that they use for driving the water wheel. How'd you get on?
Oh, well, we've done brilliantly. We've got almost all of it. Let me show you.
What was it like digging this stuff?
Not bad. It's generally soft with a few hard lumps, but the particularly easy bit was when Ian was digging it with the mechanical digger, I'm afraid. This is the clearest bit. This is the lenses of little layers, puff pastry layers of grey and yellow, which have come from where the water was. This is the actual leat here. And then along here, again, incredibly obvious, these red stones are kind of stone lining to the leat itself. So we've got the whole of this side. The only thing we haven't got is the other side. It should be exactly the same on the other side, but it's underneath that great hill.
So do we know what date this wall is?
Well, if it's a stone wall, Mick, I think that means it's going to be before the 18th century, late medieval, 16th, 17th century.
Really? As early as that?
Yeah, well, the reason is if it was 18th or 19th century, it would be a nicely dressed stone wall, or it more likely would be a brick wall, and it's not.
And you think it's late medieval?
Late medieval? Yeah.
Helen, this is you. Late medieval.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It's exactly what we wanted.
The work of this trench is now done. So we can now say it goes across here to Phil's trench, where it should join the wheel pit, if we have that.
Phil, you got anything in your trench?
Of course I have. Got the wheel pit. This is the wheel pit. A lot of that's actually filled in, but we have got to the bottom of the wheel pit. And look at this. This brick wall is actually made out of recent bricks. They're frogged. Look, there's the imprint of the frogs.
Yeah.
But what we have got is the pivot point for the wheel. So the actual wheel would have pivoted on that point there. I mean, that is really good because it'll give us an opportunity to reconstruct just how big this thing was.
So this whole thing here, that is all the wheel pit?
That is the wheel pit.
That's a hell of a sized wheel, isn't it? This photograph of the mill is helping us make sense of the archaeology.
Is that it?
I think it might be, Phil.
Oh,
That's good. Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Stone of crows.
That's following the shape of the water wheel.
Oh,
We've done it.
yeah, there's a wall. There's a great wall there.
It's a press shot.
That's the where it comes in at a higher level.
Comes in at a higher level, either at the top or sort of halfway down the wheel.
Well, you was vindicated. Strip that back a little bit, you said. I want to see that.
I did.
You said it was critical.
I did, and it is.
This wall's the same height as the wall to the side, which means that Mike's original thought was wrong. This isn't an undershot wheel like this. It's a breast shot one, like this. A much more efficient system. Off to one side of the wheel pit, we've come across a large piece of stone. Phil and I have a look at it.
Where should the middle be?
In there somewhere.
We're practically up to the cameraman's waist in debris.
Is that something in the middle?
A hole.
A hole in the middle.
What is round in a mill with a hole in the middle?
A polo. Oh, you mean this whole thing is the hole? So it's been blocked up?
Wow. I mean, that's hollow.
It's a puzzle, isn't it, Mike?
I wonder if we should be taking the machine to clear the top off here so we can get a really good look, Phil.
I think you're actually probably right.
Right, to be continued.
Phil now has his millstone. And it's a beauty. But can Martin date it?
It looks to me as though there might be 3 or 4 grooves coming off of the central
In
hole
here?
there. Down here.
One there.
Can we clean it up a bit and just have a look? The curving shape of those certainly pushes the date of this back. I mean, this is 17th, 18th century millstone, I would say.
That fits in with some of the pottery we've been looking at, surely.
Oh, lad, look at that. Isn't that a strange shape?
The key is this bit in the middle. The shape of this dates the stone as 17th century. The dates are all beginning to tie together. We now have the floor of the domestic part of the mill building. It too is a beauty. This was probably the kitchen floor. We decide to lift a section of it to see if we can see signs of any earlier flooring. Across the road in the other field, Helen and Bridge are drawing a blank. They've found the continuation of the leat. This wall is one edge of it. But there's no sign of a wheel pit, and the building doesn't seem to be attached to the leat. It's not looking like an earlier mill, and dating is a problem.
It's either before, during, or after, but we don't know which yet.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's a big piece of wood.
That is interesting, isn't it?
This is a piece of the water wheel. It's the rim.
How do you know that?
Well, look, you've got a really nice curve there, and we've got a lump of wood here, which I think is part of the base of the paddle.
And what are these lumpy bits?
Well, we've got bits of pins for holding the paddles in place.
Late 19th century?
Late 19th century, judging by the guy with the flat cap.
Late 19th century doesn't sound much, really, but actually it's 150 years ago, virtually, isn't it?
In his trench, Phil started digging. But there's a problem. There's more wood, but there also seems to be concrete.
Oh, what the hell? This is confusing, Mike. Because there's actually a piece of timber. This timber is coming right in underneath there.
Underneath the concrete?
Underneath the concrete. I reckon that concrete's going to have to come up, one way or the other.
In the field across the lane, Helen's search for an earlier mill has come to an end. She was looking for signs of a wheel pit, but there isn't one. She's now found most of the leat running from Phil's trench across the field she's been working in. But there's no sign of any building that might be a mill, and no sign of any structure other than what was probably a house.
We've opened 2 holes in it, looking for an earlier mill on this site, and I think what we have shown is that we haven't found a mill, and there's no need for a mill in this field. Everything connected with the leat is going over to that one.
Well, that's really important, isn't it? Because up until now we've had circumstantial evidence that there's only been one site for a mill here because that's the best site that there could possibly be. Now the archaeology is confirming it.
Absolutely, it certainly is here. Yes, this is all leat connected with that mill.
In fact, the leat turns out to be the key to dating the site of the earliest mill. Analysing the various maps, we realise that the key map is that of the parish. This is the parish boundary. On this side, the parish boundary is the leat. As the leat's man-made and doesn't follow any natural feature, this means that the leat must have been here when the parish boundary was laid out. And that pushes it and the mill right into the 10th or 11th century, before Domesday. Back at the main site, just off to the side of where Phil's digging, we've found a second millstone. But the quality of this stone's very poor.
It's such rubbish stone, isn't it?
Well, it is.
When you think we're in a county with Dartmoor granite, with ports that you can bring stone in from the French basin, Forest of Dean's not far away, what are they doing using rubbish like that?
It's a new red sandstone sort of conglomerate type.
Yeah.
And it's very unusual. In fact, it's the first one I've ever seen in Devon.
But they would have had grit in their grain, wouldn't they, if they'd have used that?
Well, they would, but I suspect it was used, at least latterly, for grinding animal feed with.
Ah, right.
So it wouldn't have mattered quite so much, or maybe coarse grinding of some sort. But I think the other thing is it tells us a bit more of the story that this wasn't a particularly prosperous mill latterly, that they weren't buying good quality millstones in.
So that's in great contrast to the 5 shilling at Domesday, which was a lot of money.
Well, it is indeed, isn't it? Yes, it shows how over a period of 1,000 years the life of a mill can change enormously. Yes.
We have the wheel pit, but we also have this other pit called the pit wheel. This held the gearing to turn the millstones. We do have rather a deep hole where the pit should be.
Stone of crows.
If this is the pit wheel, then it is going to be a deep slot. Almost as, well, it has to be almost as deep as the water wheel.
That is a hell of a hole down there, isn't it? What that? Hey?
And there's also this big metal lump here.
Something.
It do, done it. I mean, do you want to see if we can get this out?
I think we should go for it, yeah.
Well, it looks like the pit wheel, or part of the pit wheel.
What's this bit?
This is the rim of the gear,
right,
where the wooden cogs were mortised in. This would be the working face. Have it upright.
So vertical, Martin.
Yes.
That was going to be my next
vertical
question.
gear, and these mortises are for the wooden cogs that were in the face of the gear to mesh with the rest of the gearing in the mill.
So why are you using wooden cogs?
Well, this was a fairly large diameter gear, and in the early days they couldn't cast to good tolerances, and 2 cast iron gears running together would have been very noisy and put a lot of stress on each other. So the larger gears were often made with mortises cast in them to put wooden cogs in, which were all paired and prepared by hand, and it made for much quieter and safer running.
The cog in the centre is the piece of gear we've now found. This linked the water wheel to the millstones. It was a key part of the mill equipment. We've now plotted the internal walls of the building and have a good idea of how the inside of the last mill building on the site worked. The last building on this site seems to have been put up in the 18th century. Our earlier walls and the millstones date from the late 17th century. But the finds take us further back to the early 1600s. The wheel pit has early bricks and even earlier stone at the base. And right at the end of day 3, Phil's come up with the goods once again.
You know this piece of timber that starts there?
Yeah.
Well, I managed to trace it along, and actually, I've got it still going right through to there. It's going underneath the wall. So that piece of timber has either got to be earlier than that wall, or at the very least the same date.
As a sort of foundation timber.
Exactly.
Yes.
I think we're looking at a medieval material, unquestionably.
But I think you see the topographical situation of the place argues that it's earlier even than the structural stuff, because this mill leat that runs right the way through is the parish boundary. That's likely to have been fixed in the 10th or 11th century. Dotton's on this side of that. There's a very limited area, perhaps about 50 metres on the side of it you could put a mill. We've tested it with 3 or 4 trenches. This is the most likely place for that. So, you know, it's not just that it's 400 years old, 500 years old, it's likely to have been here for 1,000 years.
When this building was demolished in the 1960s, it wasn't just the end for a building that was a couple of 100 years old. It was the end of almost 1,000 years of milling on this very spot.
Crime Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans.
This is Manchester city centre, and behind all these posh shops lies a story that changed Britain and the world, and it's all down to this stuff: cotton. It's only just over 200 years ago that cotton cloth started to be manufactured in this country, and Manchester soon became the powerhouse and driving force behind the new cotton industry. The building at the heart of this story lies here in the city centre, and it revolutionised British society. Built in 1780, on this spot was the first cotton mill in Manchester. Today, it's buried under this car park, and we've got just 3 days to locate and retrieve one of the most important historic sites in Britain. Not that you'd know it today. Francis, if there was a mill here, they've managed to wipe out every single piece of evidence of it.
Well, not actually, Tony. Behind you there, you can see you've got cobbles. Now, I think that was the surface of the yard that went outside the mill. That's certainly early 19th century cobbles. So presumably then, Mike, the front of the mill was run along those cobbles.
Yes, Francis, we've actually got a number of maps. This is one from 1831, and it shows the mill as a rectangular building with a reservoir below it, and then the cobbles running in between.
If we know that, then why are we bothering to dig the site?
Because although this is a factory that's been used for 150 years, Tony, we don't know how the mill was laid out, we don't know how it developed.
But digging one rectangular building isn't going to take 3 days, is it?
Not one building, it's been rebuilt a number of times. It burnt down in the 1850s, for instance.
So how are we going to locate it?
Well, you see, we've had a bit of a deliberation about this. The obvious one would be to whack a trench right through the middle of it, but we really want to find out a bit more about how well preserved it is, where the width of it is. So what we're going to do is just pop one in through there. That will give us the precise width of the walls, it will give us the location of the walls, and it will give us some idea of the depth of deposits as well.
You seem quite excited about this.
I am.
Your passion is prehistory.
Yeah, but this is the prehistory of the Industrial Revolution.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Arkwright created 2 cutting-edge systems for the mill. The first was a steam engine to power the mill directly, something no one else had yet achieved. The second was an innovative water system that used a steam engine together with a water wheel. We hope to find evidence of both systems near the centre of the mill. But to find this, we need to find the mill's walls. Even though we've got various plans, they aren't reliable. So the diggers will place Trench 1 here, which they hope will stretch across one side of the original mill. The site hasn't been developed since the Blitz of 1940, when a mill rebuilt in the Victorian era was destroyed by the Luftwaffe. Because of the hard modern tarmac, the geophys team can't stick their normal sensors in the ground. Instead, they're using radar to cover the whole mill area, which will take them all day. Within an hour of stripping the surface, Phil thinks he's hit the jackpot.
Kerry, this is it. This is the wall of the mill house. We've got the yard out there, and here's the wall, and then inside the mill. Let's see a bit more of this wall here.
If Phil has hit the wall of Arkwright's 1780s mill, he's uncovered a building at the root of massive change in Manchester. A building that helped transform a village into a metropolis. As day 1 nears an end, we're still not sure if Phil's walls are Arkwright, but Mike's confident of the date of the wall in Trench 3. Well, we stopped digging and starting the recording. What's happened here?
Well, what we've got here, Tony, is we've got the end of the mill. We've got the cobbles here,
yeah,
and then we've got a line of bricks. They're a bit bashed about by a couple of holes which have been bashed through in the mid-20th century, but either side we have brick walling. You see there's got 2 rows of bricks here, and then a row of bricks and some stone sets over here, and we think that's the doorway into the mill.
You say it's the doorway into the mill, but earlier you said to me there were lots of mills at different times.
There are lots of mills. Now, we're pretty certain this is Arkwright's 1781 to 82 mill.
Why?
This is a brick from 1854. It's very sharp, it's wire cut, and it's quite chunky, very nicely made. However, that is a brick from this wall. Much, much more irregular. It's made in a wooden mould. It's a slightly smaller size, and it's far more irregular. And this was made in Manchester between 1780 and 1820. This is the brick from Arkwright's first mill.
I bet you're glad you found that.
Absolutely delighted.
So, Matt, what are we going to do with this trench now?
Well, that's it really, Tony. It's job done here, but we have got a bonus. When we got to the end of the trench, we've got this huge stone column base here, and if you look closely, you can see the circle there where the cast iron flange would have been at the bottom of the column, and these would have run all the way down the centre of the mill there.
So presumably that's proof positive that we're right inside the factory?
Absolutely.
By the end of the day, we found at least one piece of original Arkwright wall, and we're uncovering possible sites for the engine. And there's a whole other side of the story yet to explore.
For you, this dig isn't just about some old bits of machinery, is it?
No, it's about the really terrible lives of the people that worked in the mill and lived right in its shadow. In fact, over there were some buildings that we think had cellar dwellings underneath them, where the people may have actually lived. We're going to look at those tomorrow.
Should be some good finds there, shouldn't there?
Hope so.
But in addition to that, we've started work on this trench here, which is going to be huge. And already we've come up with this really interesting arch here. So tomorrow, we're not only going to try and get into the hearts and minds of the people who lived here, but into the heart of the factory that dominated their lives.
These are the same type as this, which would make them Arkwright as well.
Well, in other words, the whole thing is Arkwright.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question. That wall there is later than that wall. It sits on the plinth there.
Confused? So are we. Suddenly, Mike and Phil realise that 1780 bricks may not mean a 1780 wall. So this arch may be nothing to do with Arkwright's engine. Worse, all the dating they've done on the walls of the mill so far is thrown into question.
Now, I think we do have a little bit of Arkwright here, and that's these column bases. You can see there's one there, another one there, and another one coming up there. Arkwright used to use column bases to run down the centre of his buildings. So that gives us the alignment, because we've also found one in that little trench over there.
This tiny little thing here, yeah.
That's right, and that also had the only bit of Arkwright wall that I'm prepared to swear by. Right. Now, you can see where those two ladies have obligingly stood.
Yeah. Hello.
They're down the centre of the building.
Yeah.
And then the other one is over there by the genuine Arkwright wall. Now, what we do know is that Arkwright's buildings were 30 feet wide. If the columns are going down the middle, if we measure out 15 feet on either side, we'll get where the walls ought to be.
So do we do that?
Yeah, you can come and help me, come on. Grab the tape.
Yeah.
Hop in next door to that column.
Yeah. From the middle of the column?
The middle of the column.
Right.
Here we go. 15 feet.
Right.
So the wall, by rights, ought to be here.
And there's solid brick all over it?
Yes, that's a slight problem, isn't it? What we'll do is look underneath them just to make sure that there is wall there.
And if we are on the money there?
It's Arkwright's Mill!
So
Bridge has made great progress on her Angel Street house, revealing nearly a complete cellar dwelling in just a couple of hours. Victorian reports from Frederick Engels and others describe the hardships of living and working in the mills of the area. One of our team, Stuart, has got a personal insight into what mill life would have been like. His mother worked in a mill near Leeds.
I remember how little money we had in those early days, and I can remember hiding from the rent man because when we were a bit short on a Monday night, we used to have to keep quiet. And the lights were turned down because the rent man was expected and things like that.
It's weird because whenever we talk about mill life, it seems like it was another era. It's amazing to me that you, who are a relatively young bloke,
thank you,
still remember it.
Well, I do. I grew up with it. My mother was a weaver, worked in the weaving sheds all her life. She was incredibly physically strong. She worked 8 looms at once. but had to keep them all going the whole time. So incredibly hard physical work.
You know, one of the historians told me, and I thought this was so extraordinary, that all those northern comedians who used to speak like that with all those gestures, they actually did it, not as an affectation, but because virtually all of them worked in the mills, and it was so noisy there that they continually had to do all that elaborate communication, otherwise no one would ever understand what they were saying.
Yeah, and I can actually remember the looms turning, the noise, the workforce, the people. And one thing I remember about the loss of my mum's friends, the weavers, is that they'd lost fingers. Because when the shuttle was going backwards and forwards, you had to catch it and turn it round. And if you didn't get it right, it took your finger off. And I remember a lot of my mum's friends all sort of missing the odd end of their finger or a finger missing and things like that. So injury and deafness and hard work were all part of a weaver's life.
Beginning of day 3, and guess what? It's raining in Manchester. Mind you, it would have been pretty wet here 220 odd years ago when Richard Arkwright built his mill, because we're pretty sure the whole thing was powered by water and steam. Not that we've found that much of the factory, because every time we've got anywhere near it, it's miraculously seemed to disappear through our fingers, isn't it? So are you really confident that we actually do have the water wheel here?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, hooray, hooray, hooray. And yet you've been found wanting so many times over the last 48 hours. Why are you so sure?
Well, all the maps tell us the water wheel was in this position here where we stood.
We've seen it on the radar plan, but if you're not convinced, look at this vertical section. There's the top of the ground. That red line marks that road surface. Below that road surface is this clear response. That has to be the wheel pit.
And does it work for you in terms of the logic of the architecture?
It does, Tony, because we're in the middle of the mill, and that, in an Arkwright mill, is where the water wheel will be.
So why is it so significant that we find this wheel?
Well, it will tie everything down.
I mean, if you know the position of the water wheel, it transfers the energy via a shaft into the mill, and once you know the position of that, you can work out where all the looms are, how many there would be. The whole layout is dependent on finding that.
Back on site, the hunt for the wheel pit isn't going quite as planned. Francis, can I remind you of an exchange earlier on today? Tony, are you confident that there is a water wheel in this trench? You four? Yes, 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 yes. Hello, water wheel, where are you? It's not there.
It's turned out to be a little bit more complicated than that, Tony.
Is it?
Yeah. In fact, it's all happening as we speak. Phil down there has got something, and I don't know what it is. And he won't tell us.
Francis!
Yeah?
Got it!
Really?
Yes!
Yards away, Phil's now uncovered the thing that ran under the wall.
Come and have a look.
Oh, heck.
What do you think of that, then?
I wasn't expecting that, Phil.
It's a 20th century drain.
Well, I'm completely gobsmacked.
I reckon we might actually finally have this well pit, you know.
That is deep.
That is deep.
How deep are you now?
Well, I did dangle a tape over there and it was 12 foot, so it's supposed to be 15 foot, so my money's on 3 more foot.
And that's 8 feet wide?
That's 8 foot wide, just bang on the money for that one.
And we didn't see it.
All the walls down there, all 4 of them, appear to be lined in this stuff, and it's all the way round.
Well, that looks like that pitch or bitumen, but that's the sealant.
That's right, then presumably that hole was designed to take water. That's going to protect the brickwork.
Yeah, it would have to be watertight, so that could mean that's a well. What if this is the very first steam engine he installed, the 1781 one, which was meant to be running the machinery? That would have to be in the middle of the mill, like a water wheel, to run the machinery. It failed, but instead of building a new engine, they adapted it as a pumping engine. That would mean that we've found our 1781 engine and it under our very noses. It was here all the time. Okay,
thanks, mate.
It's deep.
It's massive, isn't it?
All right, so if the wheel was in there, what about the steam?
Come over here. We now think this is the site of Arkwright's 1781 steam engine he tried to use to power textile machinery.
But if that was his very first engine,
that was the one that didn't work properly.
It was.
So why is it still here?
Well, it was positioned in the middle of the mill so it could run the line shafting to power the textile machinery that way.
Yeah.
It didn't work, so what it looks like they've done is they've reused it for pumping water from the lower reservoir through the well there and out onto a spillway into channels running that way. Somebody has tried to apply steam to textile machinery.
So this isn't just archaeology, this is history.
This is where the modern world begins.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
Buck Mill lies near the village of Stoke Trista in Somerset. We know that the ruins belong to a watermill that went out of use 150 years ago, but its past remains a mystery. Although there is one exciting clue, a Domesday reference that suggests beneath the ruins we could find a mill that dates back to the Normans. So by excavating Buck Mill, we hope to learn just how this powerful mill would have shaped the lives of people around here, possibly for 1,000 years.
Hang on, whoa, that's it.
Phil's job will be to uncover the industrial end of the mill by digging down into the wheel pit. While at the other end of the building, we're hoping to find what we think is the miller's house. And the moment the brambles around the wheel pit are cleared, we make our first find.
Is it that? Ah, that's it.
So what's that then? Any ideas?
It seems a little bit lightweight for the mill, but I can't think what else it could be at this point.
I'm told identifying mill parts can be a bit of a brain teaser, because there were so many bits and bobs of machinery required to get the power of the water to the millstones. But we do know our mill is likely to be one of 3 common types of water wheel. The most basic and least efficient undershot wheel, or a middle-of-the-range breastshot wheel, or the most complex design of all, an overshot wheel. With almost no records to go on, we'll be relying on our army of diggers to explain the mill's past. So now the brambles are cleared, they can get stuck in.
A cavity opened up in here. Look, there's a piece of curving metal going down.
That looks like part of the wheel, Phil.
You reckon that what that is?
I think we found a bit of a metal water wheel.
This really is a big discovery, and the more of the wheel we find, the more it can tell us about the power and importance of this mill.
Ah, there it is.
That's fantastic. That's part of one of the buckets of the water wheel. That's part of a metal bucket.
That is the water wheel.
It is part of the water wheel. Part of the bottom of the wheel is still in there.
Can you date this design of construction?
Well, an all-metal wheel like that is going to be sort of middle of the 19th century.
Down here, amongst all this rubble somewhere, we think we've got the mill wheel, the very heart of all the activity here. We couldn't have really dreamt of better in the whole of the 3 days. But the other thing that's really impressing me is the size of this site now. We started off with just a few crumbled bits of wall, and now we've got all this. And if that wasn't enough, take a look down there. Helen, what do you reckon that is?
Well, at first sight, that looks very much like an Anglo-Saxon comb.
Anglo-Saxon? This mill is starting to get rather weird.
So, Phil, what have we got now?
How we got the other side, the wheel, Martin.
That's
Look,
excellent.
Here's the actual circumference, inner circumference of the wheel coming round there. And then we've got a bucket there, and it looks like we've got a bucket coming in there. But the crucial thing is we've actually got part of the internal structure of the wheel, because we've got one of the spokes in there, and then we got another one there, look, and another one here, and another one back there as well. What they've done before they demolished the mill was they looked at all this scrap metal in the wheel, thought we could make use of that. So what they've done is they've chopped the wheel off, and then when they've demolished the mill, all the demolition rubble has gone in on the top of it, and the rest of the wheel's been taken away.
But the 1782 map would suggest they also put a lot of effort into their homes. And our second trench is now going in over the end of the building we believe is the miller's house. and within seconds, Faye and Rakshar hit a rather posh stone floor.
This little bit here.
I just want to see what's happening here. It seems to be disappearing. Yeah, I think, if we just go to that level. Yep.
In the middle of the building, Tracy is looking for the cog pit, which would have held the gears required to transfer power from our 19th century mill wheel to the millstones. Mick suspects the mill's history should go back much further. But the big question is, this is only, 18th, 19th century? What's underneath it?
Well, yeah, that's the problem, you see. We could end up with a really good plan of an 18th or 19th century mill, for which there are hundreds still standing.
So they've all been turned into tea shops, haven't they?
Yeah, and posh restaurants, the sort of place you go to, you know.
And in the cog pit, Tracy has uncovered what could be another important piece of the mill's machinery.
I mean, we've got the cog hole here, which would have attached to the wheel. The cog pit, which would have been in here, we haven't got it yet.
OK, that's good, isn't it?
Yeah. But then behind me, I think you're going to like this.
Oh, crikey.
First millstone.
Yeah.
Half a millstone, anyway.
A half a one. Is that in situ there, is it?
Well, we don't know until we've cleaned around some more of the demolition material, but it does look very flat. It might form the back wheel, the back wall, rather, of the cog pit.
But that should help, because the size of it, the type of stone, the patterning on us will give us the date of it.
Yeah, and then we see it coming up down here where James is working. We've got the floor coming up.
Great.
Yeah, it's starting to really come together.
What is it in the landscape that makes you think there might be an earlier mill up there?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, this depression we're in is the original stream course, the meandering course of the stream that comes down the valley. See, it rises up here.
Yeah.
And where Mick's heading up here.
Up here, look.
See that terrace, he's walked from all the way up there, he's walking along it. That carries on up this side of the valley, up into the hills up there. And what that leach should be doing is bringing water to the like a mill, just about there.
Oh, let's make it a bit more dramatic than that. Here is your theoretical mill. Phil hasn't stopped digging into the wheel pit at Buck Mill since he uncovered a section of water wheel.
Oh, Martin, come and have a look at this. It's getting quite a lot of this wheel now.
Oh, you've got a lot more showing now than yesterday.
Well, that's right. You see, I mean, yesterday, if you remember, we started to expose the wheel over there, but now we're away from the wall. Look, you've got a nice run of the metal wheel running right down in under my feet, and we're beginning to get these spokes going right through. It's going to be fascinating.
You've exposed so much more of this now that I can see that my initial thoughts weren't quite right.
In what way?
I was thinking that it was a brush shot wheel turning that way.
Ah!
And now, as you can see from the way the buckets are, it turned that way, didn't it? It's an overshot wheel. The water must have come over the top. They could only be filled on the downside.
Well, you can actually see that here because of the curvature of this bucket here. Forgive my ignorance, but what difference does it make which way round the wheel goes?
Well, in a way, the direction doesn't matter too much. It's where the water comes onto it. The fact the water's coming on the top and it's an overshot wheel means it's the best solution. It's the most powerful, it's the most efficient type of wheel you could have.
So is that really upping the status and power of this mill?
Yeah, I think we're putting it up where I'd like to see it, really. It points to this being an older site.
The mill's not going to be massively far that way,
no,
because they use the water for the wheel, and as soon as they finish with it, it's off back down to the stream.
Chuck it back in the stream.
That's what's going down there. Yeah. So it's really, if it's not in this section here, we need to be sampling along this terrace here for perhaps another 30 metres to see if it's in this, because it really ought to be in the next 30 metres or so, I would suggest.
Phil, last time I was here, it was all covered in scrub and up 19th century. We've done a hell of a lot of work.
We have, and now it's all complicated.
Is the house at the other end then still a house? Is that still contemporary?
I think that's still residential, yes.
Yeah.
But we've still got to actually try and tie in the actual phases of building with what we've got where Tracy is.
Yeah.
And then we've actually got to start building on from that and trying to actually understand what's going on in the phasing over this side. And this wall here, you see, once we get up on the top here, we got a wall coming through here, comes through underneath here, and goes straight down through the wall pit. This doesn't appear to come straight through here. Look, we got this one that comes across there. So there's walls everywhere, and until we actually look at the way each wall joins on or butts up against every other wall, we won't understand what's going on in this building. It's
going to be tricky, isn't it?
We can do it.
At the site of our possible early medieval mill, Matt and his diggers have spent a day and a half sifting through clay, but have yet to make a single find. And if you thought life couldn't get any more miserable for them, it's started to rain. The only person who seems unfazed by the many phases of Buck Mill is Helen. Yesterday's finds are telling her there was once a flourishing family business here.
Well, we've got a will of the miller who died in 1703, John Bengerfield, and he leaves a big estate. It's worth something like £300, and it includes land as well. Now, I don't think he should have been making that money from the mill. Did it come from the land? Maybe. This object that I'm just halfway through cleaning really illustrates that, because it's a clothing clasp. It's got very detailed, very well cast decoration, and you can probably see in the sunlight that it's got a little bit of silver coating on it. So when new, it would have looked like silver. This would have looked really smart. This dates to the first few decades of the 16th century, so it's nearly 200 years older than the 17th century items. It's a purse hanger, would have had coins or something like that in there. And so it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't have unless you had a bit of money. Very much a kind of middle class item. And that was also found in the 18th century mill. So one wonders if the people associated with the mill were always a bit more middle class than you might expect.
The scale of the mill house that John Bengerfield lived in late in the 17th century also points to our millers being surprisingly posh. While our early medieval mill is condemned to the clay, at the cockpit of Buck Mill, Tracy has had what can only be described as an archaeological epiphany.
Well, yeah, I had a real Agatha Christie moment earlier on.
Come on, give us your moment.
Well, we have the strange tale of the broken clasp, the smashed teacup and the careless smoker.
Recount the story to me.
Well, we got down to the bottom of the cockpit yesterday.
Yeah.
And we've got a really well rammed in stone floor down there.
Yeah.
Underneath the floor, just at the point where it was being laid, we found this. It's mid-17th century and would have been some sort of dress fastening.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody's been standing up here, this is broken off and fallen down. They haven't found it. They've carried on laying the floor, so that gives us a really nice date for the laying of the floor. Then straight away, when the floor has been laid, before anything's built up, no silting or anything like that, we have a chappie, he's smoking his pipe.
This is the careless smoker?
This is the careless smoker. And he's smoking his pipe and he's dropped it and he's smashed it.
Why is he careless?
Well, you can't have a naked flame in the flour mill because the flour will just combust and boom, bang goes your mill. So the only time he could have been smoking was when they were building the walls. But then unfortunately the same poor chap, he's had his cup of tea and he's smashed his teacup.
And what sort of date is this?
The cup dates 1660 to about 1680, so that ties in really nicely with the clasp and gives us a good dating for the construction of the first phase of this part of the mill.
So very possibly thanks to John Bengerfield and his butterfingers, we now know that the earlier phase of the mill was built between 1660 and 1680. But just how he became so wealthy remains a bit of a puzzle. Because the mill was only average in size and power, we don't know how he came to have such a big house, unless perhaps he had his fingers in other pies. And because of our archaeologists' detective work, we now have a pretty good idea of what Buck Mill would have looked like right back to the 17th century. This earliest phase of mill could have been built by John Bengerfield between 1660 and 1680, at which point the mill would have had a much wider water wheel. In the 18th century, another pair of millstones were added. Around the 1830s, the more primitive wooden wheel would have been removed and replaced by the cast iron overshot wheel, which required fundamental changes to the water supply and wheel pit. Buck Mill had a leat bringing water from the stream over a mile up the valley. So it would have been a remarkable feat of engineering that supported not only generation after generation of miller, but the entire community around them.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.